When did Caesar ask that question? I mean,
I don't know, but I thought that
he messaged me privately.
Okay. I have to have a fucking talk with Caesar so he understands the pecking order of Bourbon with Friends.
Shut up. Marla.
It's time for Bourbon with Friends, the Bourbon podcast that never takes itself too seriously. Pull up a chair, grab a glass, and remember, a bourbon with friends can change the world. Here we go.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Bourbon with Friends. Myself, Adrian, and Martin are here to talk about whiskeys from around the world and how a bourbon with friends can change the world. How are you? Both of you.
Fantastic. You hear that?
Same.
The enthusiasm behind that?
What the fuck? That's not you. Stop it.
I know. Yeah, you're right. It was okay. It was okay. It wasn't that great. You know, today's the day. I'm doing okay. But no, it's going to be much better because we're going to have a little bit of fun tonight, as we always do here on Friends with Bourbon or Bourbon with Friends, whatever this podcast is called. We are actually a unique kind of guest tonight because I don't think up until this point, all the distilleries that we have, people from distilleries, we've never actually been to some of them. Brian, you've had an opportunity to, but Adrian and myself have actually not. But we're actually had the opportunity this past summer to visit the lovely Wollersheim distillery up in Wisconsin. And we have Tom Linares from Wollersheim today. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Welcome. I'm wearing your shirt.
Yeah, it's a great shirt.
Yep, it's a good shirt. It's comfortable. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
So I've figured I'd wear it. I actually wasn't wearing this prior. I'm like, oh shit, I have a shirt. Why am I not wearing that? So I had to go change real quick. Yeah. But here we are. All right. We got some questions for you, Tom.
Sure.
Yeah. So hi, Thomas. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
How can you tell us how you got started in the world of whiskey?
How I got started in the world of whiskey. So personally, my dad was always a big bourbon drinker when I was growing up. And so when I got to the age that people start drinking, not necessarily 21, but that was the first thing I started diving into, was bourbon primarily. Him and my grandfather ran like a liquor store in town. And so like he would tell me these stories about the whiskeys he used to drink, and bourbon was the thing he used to drink. 2010, my wife and we got married that summer and we moved to upstate New York, and I got a job at a distillery out there, Finger Lakes Distilling. Mm-hmm. And that's the timing there was really serendipitous with like the boom of small distilleries and the growth of small distilling. And so that's when I really started really getting into bourbon. Before that, I tried like maybe a half dozen bourbons, 3, 4, 5 bourbons, not a lot, kind of just like a little interested hobby. And then when I got there, I was like, oh, wow, there's a huge world. There's a lot of brands. And I primarily worked in the tasting room. So people would come in and I just, on slow days, have conversations and learn about different bourbons or scotches or tequilas or whatever people liked and why they liked it. And then I would go into town and try to find those brands. And so that was kind of my exploratory days, real small business. So I helped with like moving barrels around the warehouse, filling bottles in between, like when there's no customers in there. I also did like in-store tastings and made deliveries to liquor stores and bars and stuff like that. And so that was really my first introduction to the industry. Prior to that, a little bit about me. I married my high school sweetheart, my wife, Celine. Her family owns Wollersheim. So she grew up in the industry. Yeah.
Perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah. So 2010 was also the year that the winery got its distilling license. And so I was talking with Philippe, again, tried like 3, 4, 5 bourbons. And Philippe was telling me about this concept of this all Wisconsin cognac idea that him and Bob had talked about as far back as the 80s, but Wisconsin state law didn't allow wineries to have distilling licenses. So we had applied for the license, and he was excited to start making brandy as soon as that license came in. And I made an off the cuff comment at the dinner table that, all Wisconsin brandy sounds cool and all, but, I'm a bourbon guy because I've tried like 3 of them. And he said, well, maybe someday we'll make like 5 barrels. And I was like, okay, I'll just figure out how to do it. And then I won't have to buy bourbon anymore. I can just like work my normal job, make bourbon on the weekends, and have like a barrel of bourbon that I'll draw from. Because I didn't, again, like 2010, there wasn't really a lot of small distilleries. So I had no idea what it could be. And so in 2010, that's when I started diving into it, worked at that distillery out there for 2 years. When we moved back home after my wife finished her master's in food science in wine at Cornell, we came back. I worked in the vineyard, and then I worked at a local brewery here in Wisconsin for 2 years before coming and starting here at the distillery.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I
Great
feel
story.
retarded now. That's
a
great.
great story. I love that story.
Well, like I mentioned kind of in our intro, Adrian and myself got to come, and that was one thing that I thought was really cool that I didn't know. And I remember pulling up. We were a group of us came and visited you guys back in July, and I actually did not know that you guys did like brandies and wines, but I did not know that it was that. I knew about the whiskey, and that was kind of it. I'm kind of the same way. Like I'm a whiskey guy.
Sure.
Don't always pay attention to all the other things. Unfortunately, I've been trying to get a little bit better with that, but the grounds in general is like the first thing that took me back. I'm like, can we just stay here all day? Just because like you could.
Beautiful.
I mean, genuinely, it blew my mind. I don't think the words "this place is beautiful" could have been said more than we did that day. But it was super cool to like learn the process behind that, and then the history too, because I mean, it goes all the way back to the 1800s. That property, is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, we were founded by Augustin Herazzi. He originally came from Hungary, what is now Hungary, and settled our town. And he owned like the lumber yard, and he started the winery and a bunch of different things. He brought with him grapes from Europe and tried to plant grapes, and they died pretty quickly because Wisconsin winter is pretty tough. Yeah. And he heard there was gold out in California, so he sold all of his businesses to various people. He sold the winery to the Kale family. And the Kale family replanted American native varietals that were more cold hardy and started making wine with that. He chased the California gold rush and arrived late. He has quite a history. I won't get too deep into it, but he went back to Europe, brought more vines, and planted some of the original vineyards in California. And so we're like a neat little footnote of the like winery he tried to start before starting what is now Buena Vista in California. And the Kale family sold or grew grapes on the property and made wine, used distillation to make brandy to fortify the wine, because Wisconsin has these shorter growing seasons and the American native varieties are lower in sugar and therefore lower in alcohol. As a result, they would add some of the brandy to the wine to make it like 15, 16% alcohol. So it was more stable for shipping. And so we have records showing they sold wine as far as Maine, and they sold bulk brandy by the gallon jug. And so they distilled here until Prohibition. They had a really bad winter in like the early 1900s that killed most of the vines. And then Prohibition was like, we give up. We're just gonna be a farm. And so it was a family farm until 1972, when I think it was the 4th generation of Kales sold it to Bob and Joanne Wallersheim, who replanted our vineyards. So yeah, that's my wife's grandparents.
That's so cool. And like I said, you walk around the place and you see the history, and I thought that was cool. I think we all mentioned we're going to get back to the grounds in general to kind of give people a layout. We have a question about that later, but
sure.
It felt like we weren't in Wisconsin anymore.
Right.
It just felt very just like a Tuscan villa or something like that.
Yeah.
When you're there. And it just has such a great vibe, and it's got such a rich history that I was kind of interested to hear about where that all started.
Right.
So our listeners could hear it. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I know we have some listener questions. I don't know who wants to take the one from our good friend Caesar. But
I think I could take that.
Okay.
Sometimes I can read. So we have a good friend, Caesar. He's been to your distillery quite a few times, I believe. And
Okay.
so is his neighbor, we like to call her, Patty.
Yeah.
His question for you is, have you thought about doing a collaboration with any other distilleries, especially other Midwestern distilleries?
Collaboration has come up in our Distillers Guild. So I'm involved heavily in the Wisconsin Distillers Guild. I'm on the board there. We just hosted an event for our members about a month or so ago. I had Joe Henry on a panel, as well as Peter Nam from a distillery up in Minocqua. And we did a panel discussion on blending and barrel selection and product development and those different things. So it's a very collaborative community here in Wisconsin, very close with the other distillers. So yeah, it's come up. The question just becomes logistics, because there's a lot of often there's a lot of red tape with it. As we know, one distillery is ultimately responsible for that product. And so if we transfer all the barrels to that one distillery then has the onus of making sure it's successfully moved through the market and all that. So it's a thing that's come up, but yeah, I think everybody's got a lot of irons in the fire right now, where it just hasn't been anything we've taken forward. But the thought process was to do something, potentially as a fundraiser for the State Guild. Cool. Another idea, and New York has done it. They have Empire Rye, which is they have their own stricter standards. Something like that has been discussed or tossed around here in Wisconsin, but very, very minimally discussed. Yeah. There's been a lot of higher priority projects. So,
no, that makes sense. And even doing projects working with Lost Lantern. I know you guys did a release with them, things like that. So even stuff like that, the thought of more indie bottlings from places out of the Midwest in general, but specifically Wisconsin. But yeah.
And the Lost Lantern thing made a lot of sense to us. They have that direct to consumer throughout the country. We're really focused on our backyard, just primarily the Madison market and through the front door here. So it was a good opportunity to kind of share our stuff with other people.
No, that's awesome. And I think we have one more.
Yeah, I think we have another one. What do you want to say, Brian?
No, I'm just jealous. I want to be there. Not really, but I'm okay with where I'm at.
It's pretty cold today.
Yeah.
It's cold here too.
Was.
Yeah.
I think the high today was 30.
Yeah. It's about 10, I think, today.
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah, it's cold. It's a cold day in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
That's all you guys.
There was one other question, I think, from a viewer or listener. Why does the rye out of Wisconsin just seem to make rye whiskey so much more flavorful?
So I can't speak for all the Wisconsin distillers, but I do think at least our approach with rye, and I think there's some Minnesota distillers this way as well. A lot of the rye is grown in Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin. I actually have a book right up here that is a grain manual from Seagram's, telling to teach employees about grain, and it's from the 40s and 50s, and it said the best rye, if you can get it from Wisconsin, the best rye comes from Wisconsin, which was a really interesting thing to see. But our approach is really focusing on hardy varietals and experimenting with different varietals. And since we're so close to small farmers, we do have the opportunity to experiment with that. The Northeast is known for it, like Pennsylvania rye and New York, like I mentioned, but their moisture is more disease prone for their rye. So it is more challenging to grow rye in the Northeast than it is to grow it in the Midwest. And so we do have that direct access to the grains. As far as the Kentucky rye, you have a lot of the barely legal rye, which, is just over 50%. And then you have pretty much a lot of people tell me oh, I don't like rye. Well, most of the ryes they've tried have all come out of MGP. Not saying that they make bad whiskeys or anything, but if that 95% rye gives you a lot of that rye spice, but not necessarily a lot of body. And so when I started distilling, because of the low rye content ryes out of Kentucky, I was kind of the mindset that I was going to do no corn in my rye. It's going to do like 75, 80, 85% rye, and then malt barley for the rest of it. And my first batch, I think, was 75-25 or 80-20, something like that. And it was like, okay, I got a lot of nice rice spice, got these nice baking notes, baking spice notes, things like that, baked bread, but I'm missing texture. And so I did dabble. I added just 11% rye, took down a little bit on the malt, and then a little bit on the rye. I was like, okay, I got some texture, but my flavor is getting diluted, but it's not enough texture. Let's try 22% corn. And so I bumped it up to 22% corn. So it's 2/3 rye, and then 2/3 of the third is corn, and then the rest is malt barley. And I found, at least for me, I found a nice balance of texture and spice. I don't get a lot of the herbal characteristic, but I get this really like full mouthfeel, robust character that I personally really like. And I would say, at least for our front of house staff, I would bet 50 to 60% of them, their favorite things are our rye expressions, whether it's our regular rye, the cask strength rye, or port finish rye. I think it's a thing that we do uniquely well here. And I think a lot of the other Wisconsin distillers are playing with those approaches because they know that they don't want to dabble into the bulk market necessarily, and they want to do something that's unique and different. Also, I think Wisconsin growing or Wisconsin aging conditions, if you do open air or you allow that cool Wisconsin weather, relatively speaking, in comparison to Kentucky, you're going to get a much more grain forward whiskey and a less wood forward whiskey. And so you get a nice balance of those grain characteristics without overpowering the wood sweetness. That's been at least my experience.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's, I think that was the biggest thing. I mean, I think rye is becoming such a great category, but every rye that I've tried from both you guys and other Wisconsin distilleries has been probably my favorite expressions of the last year or so. It's very unique. It's very flavorful. It's just very different from everything else. And I think that's refreshing in this ever evolving whiskey thing.
Yeah.
So,
and we have great neighbors. The distilleries near us are all making, very solid whiskey, which is, it's nice to be with good company.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, what you guys said. I'm actually more curious about the whole climate and situation that you actually have up in your area, especially when you were talking there, because the grains and how that climate controls the grains and the distillate process afterwards with the barrel temperatures and controls, everything like that. I want to get nerdy with it, but I know we have to have some fun questions at the same time. So we always have this question. It always changes how we started this question. I say Adrian ran over a squirrel in her driveway and then started the podcast, but I'm pretty sure that's not right.
It's not.
But we always ask a squirrel question and how it starts. So this question that we have for you today is kind of in an area for your company. Directly, just because you have such a vast property, you have a winery, you have a phenomenal restaurant, I'm hearing, and then you have the distillery as well. So in what area of this vast property / distillery / winery would you have a squirrel in charge of, and why?
It's a human-sized one.
Yeah, it's a human-sized squirrel.
It's a human-sized one.
It can wash its hands.
It can do everything.
Yeah.
Let's hope so.
Doesn't have do they have opposable thumbs? They have opposable thumbs. They have to be able to hold nuts.
Oh,
They do.
They do?
Yeah.
Okay. I would put it in charge of the bottling line, believe it or not.
Oh, okay.
Let's hear this.
I feel like there's no good place to put a squirrel in charge, but
No, there never is.
The thought process the other day is I was walking down the driveway and I heard a squirrel, and I was deciding whether or not it was beatboxing at me or just being territorial. And they have this.
Beatboxing.
they have this ability to just be like hyper focused on something and move very quickly. And the bottling line requires you to like hyper focus on making sure that the equipment is running smoothly and then react very quickly. And I feel like squirrels would be good at doing that. So
That's true.
Yeah, I just hope their tail doesn't get in the way.
Just
right,
knocks.
exactly. Yeah.
Bottles 1 knocks 4 over. So,
And what
I
type
like
of
that.
hairnet would they would have to use?
It'd be a big
Body
hairnet.
net.
Yeah.
Body net.
Jesus. Body
yeah.
net?
Yeah. Well, thank you for entertaining that question.
Yeah, thank
That was
you.
awesome.
We always ask.
I've never gotten a question like that before.
There we go. There we go. There we go. Thank God. And maybe never again. If I'm being honest, we might never get one of those again. So back to nerdy stuff. Again, I and Adrian and myself have been, but I always like to get. This is probably one of the more nerdy questions we ask. But if you can kind of give us a walkthrough of distillery equipment, and then we usually kind of just stop there with most of the people we talk to. But you guys got such an amazing place that I'd love to kind of paint a picture of what else people could experience when they come to Wollersheim.
Sure. So equipment wise, we originally started on roughly like 120 gallon direct fire still that we used to use in the winery building. We started with alternating proprietorship license. And so basically, or alternating premise license. So we had a room that was zoned to either be a winery or a distillery, but it couldn't be both at the same time. So after harvest was done, we put all the harvest equipment away and we set up the still and started distilling in that space. And so direct flame, very low, infrastructure, just hook up the burner. This room is our press room. So it's designed to be basically open to outside. So we had good air exchange from a safety standpoint. And we made about 6 barrels over 6 weeks the first year on that still. Then when we built the distillery, we designed it with a 250 gallon Vendome hybrid still in mind. We have what is called a brandy helmet on it. So we can do pure pot still.
Yeah.
Or we can do up to 6 plates on the side column. And we have a gin basket that we use for gin and some other stuff, but whatever. The column, we deliberately went with a 6-plate column because our first spirit we started distilling was that all Wisconsin cognac, Cocard brandy. And the idea was to bring the winemaking concept of terroir to our spirit lineup. So we're trying to express uniquely Wisconsin flavors. So doing a big 20-plate column and making vodka on there is kind of antithetical to that mission statement where, vodka is defined as neutral. So that was that. We added a second pot. We converted the first pot to steam coil and ran that alongside the 250 for about a year. Then we added a second pot. And so the 2 pots were running brandy year round and the Vendome was running whiskey year round. And about a year ago, we added a 500 gallon Vendome that is the column right on top. And it's only 4 plates. And we do that still either whiskey or brandy. So right now we're running brandy on all of our stills. We fill about 10 barrels a week right now, up from about 6 a year ago. And as far as new equipment, nothing, we just got that 500. So it'll probably be a little while before we add anything else.
Is it just, sorry to interrupt, is that a column or just is it a pot column?
It's a hybrid with, it's a pot with a column on top. Yeah.
Okay. A pot column still. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. Not a continuous column. When we designed the facility, the room over to my left here is our grain fermentation room. We designed that space with a 500 gallon mash cooker. We ran our 250 twice a day, 5 days a week for the first 2 or 3 years. And that would make basically a barrel a day on just that, on that 250. It was a lot of long days for me, but we knocked it out. So we set up a 500 gallon cooker. So basically we could cook a recipe and distill 1 barrel per day and do a different batch each day. And we started with 2 1,500 gallon fermenters. So we were doing 2 cooks on one day and 3 cooks on another day, which again was long days, but that allowed us to make that 5 barrels a week. we added another fermenter in there, but those fermenters were sized and the cooker was sized. We could do 3 cooks and feed a continuous still and run off about 4 barrels in a day with a continuous still. But when we were evaluating the adding the 500 or adding the continuous, we were a little worried about change of flavor profile. And then it was also just seemed like maybe a little more capacity than we needed. And so we're doing the 500 gallon. And the plan is if we need to augment capacity, we would just hire another distiller and run a second shift instead of running the continuous for a single shift. That was kind of the thing we settled on there. Yeah, and then that's here in the distillery building. So like I mentioned, the property was built in the 1800s as a winery. So as you come up the hill, you'll see the distillery to your right, the winery to the left. You go up the hill, there's a old cave there that used to be where they lived while they built the winery. It's just kind of a historic display. We have the winery store and the bistro up there. If you do a winery tour, you can see through the windows some of the wine fermenters. We make about 1 million bottles of wine, give or take, a year. So we have room for 300,000 gallons of fermentation capacity or something like that. So we have about 40 some 5,800 gallon tanks and a bunch of smaller tanks as well. And so that's all on the wine side, because on the wine side, we have to make all the wine in September, October for the entire year, including the wine we're distilling for brandy. Whereas on the whiskey side, I can make 500 gallons, or I can make 1,000 gallons of whiskey mash or 1,500 gallons of whiskey mash in a day. So times 5 days times 40 weeks a year, 45 weeks a year, whatever that is. That's how much capacity I can do on my 1,500 gallon tanks, because we can do that turn and burn. So we also have a bottling line on hand downstairs in the distillery space. It is set up to do wine or spirits. We can do as little as a 187 ml single serve wine bottle up to 1 liter, bar package for spirits. It will do 2,000 bottles an hour when we're doing spirits, but when we do wine, we do about 3,000 bottles an hour, 25,000 bottles a shift.
Wow.
So yeah.
That's insane.
Wow.
It's so cool. And again, for anybody listening who is not, please go visit Wollersheim. It's genuinely a very beautiful place to go check out, and you can make a day of it. I mean, even if you're not like a whiskey person, if you can go up, have the food's delicious. If you are in the distillery, get the pretzel, because I love that pretzel, by the way. I'm a big pretzel guy, and I was like, I gotta have that. And again, I'm not a big cocktail guy. One of the best old fashions I've ever had. So genuinely, I'm hard to please when it comes to cocktails, and I genuinely enjoyed that one. I actually had 3 that day because I enjoyed it so much. So if anybody is able to get up there, it's a whole experience for a great day. So,
well, Tom, I actually really want to know more about your bottling line. Who gave you? So, long story short, I work for a distillery as well. I would love to know who did your bottling line, and if you have a spare one, you could just say
we don't have a spare. We do have a hand bottler. We do the 4-head milker style hand bottler. We'll do our single barrels on that, and some of our 2, 3, 4 barrel blends. But by and large, I call it campaigns. We'll do 1 or 2 bottlings a year of our core products, and so that allows us to blend large batches for consistency, so consumers are getting a very consistent product with those key products. So we and the spirit side, our spirit side is much smaller than our wine side. So for like Prairie Fumé, which is our best selling wine, we might have 3 days a week for several weeks be bottling that wine, whereas for our bottled and bond bourbon, we do 1 batch a year, and it's a morning on that line, right? And so it's just it's nice to have those economies of scale built in. Helps us pass those savings on to consumers. That's a big fundamental family value with us. Our original business model was by Bob was to make like a high quality wine at an affordable price. I say the business model is we make what we like, we drink what we can, and we sell the rest. And so like we like to consume our product, and we like it to be at an affordable price point. And so having those economies of scale helps us keep our spirits in, you know, that $35-$40 price point. So.
That's awesome. That's amazing.
Because I know how much those bottling lines cost.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we've had this one since like before I've been here. I think it was 10 years old when I got here. So probably 2001, I think we've had it.
That's still amazing. It's if you're processing, I'm not even going to go into pricing, but that's phenomenal what you guys are doing and how you guys are doing it and producing it for the right reasons. And like you said, to consume as much as you can, but make sure the rest goes out to the appropriate people and so they can enjoy it.
Exactly. Nice.
Damn.
I know we have just a couple more for you.
Sure.
Yeah. So can you tell us about any upcoming releases that you're excited about?
So we are a week and 3 days, a week and 4 days, a week from Friday. We will be releasing our second ever barrel of our family reserve bourbon, which is our wheated bourbon. This release will be 8 years old and bottled at cask strength. So that is something I'm excited about. That's very close on the horizon. The other day I was in the barrel room and I tasted through some things. I have one barrel of pear brandy. That's about 3.5 years old. That's tasting pretty good. I don't know when we'll bottle it since we only have the one. But I want to make sure we bottle it before the wood takes over, because then what's the point? And then I have we have done it in the past, but I have a couple barrels of rye whiskey distilled from rye mash. So whiskey that did not go into a new barrel, aged exclusively in port barrels for its entire life. We did one barrel at 2 years and one barrel at 6 years. And I have two barrels that are 5 years right now. And I tasted those the other day. Those are pretty good. So, but yeah, nothing, no new categories or anything at the moment. Just some very limited run. Like I have 8-9 barrels of corn whiskey aged in our port barrels that are about 7-8 years old. I have some malt whiskey, stuff like that, but it's all very like limited short run. We don't have any new products on the horizon, like permanent add-on products. We did just release our blackberry flavored brandy back in May, so that's been a huge hit, and just trying to keep up with that at the moment.
Nice. That's amazing. We have some friends that'll be joining again on the 13th. So Age and myself will be living vicariously since we're not able to make it this time. But yeah, you'll have a couple from our group up there because they were going to come and check out that new release. I know they're pretty excited about that. So
yeah, that's going to be an exciting day. This Friday and next Friday, we do festive Fridays. We stay up and late. We do live music, stuff like that.
I know. I'm bummed. We're bummed we can't make it because it sounds like a lot of fun. So. Hopefully we'll hear lots of stories, and I'm sure I'll get to try the whiskey once it's brought back to our area. So awesome.
Show off.
We'll get to some.
Wisconsin is far. Kind of far.
It's about 3.5 hours for me.
All right. So we always have one question. It's always our favorite question to ask every single individual. And it's your favorite whiskey memory or spirit memory that you could have had from a childhood all the way to now.
At the grand opening of the distillery, which was just a few years after we moved back from New York, we had some friends who we met in New York, but actually one of them was from Wisconsin. They ended up living in Chicago. They decided to come up for the grand opening of the distillery and come visit. And we cracked open a bottle of light whiskey from Four Roses from, I'm looking up at it, from 1957 that they they had gifted me. I was starting to do this dusty hunting, and we were drinking whiskey together. And he went home to visit some family member, and it was just like shoved all the way back in the liquor cabinet. And he brought it out and he gifted it to me for Christmas that year in 2010 or 2011.
Wow.
And so in 2015, when we opened the distillery, he came to visit. We cracked it and we drank it. So that was probably one of the highest highlights. So yeah.
Holy shit.
How was it?
It was good. I mean,
Was
it's
it?
like whiskey, but it was good.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, it was-
yeah.
so,
It's a great answer. It's like whiskey, but it was good.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I
when
mean,
you're
it's-
drinking something that's older than you are, right?
Yeah,
When it's older
it's-
than yeah.
Yeah. It's history. So
Yeah.
that was cool to do that.
Well, that's pretty damn amazing.
That's pretty
I'm
cool.
super jealous. All right, Martin, it's your job.
All right, guys. So we have one more before we say farewell to our friend Tom here, and thank him for joining us. But I do have to do one job. I talked this whole time. That was the first job. This is the second job. So this thing that I have to do right here is I have to say thanks to our sponsor, which is 10th Mountain Whiskey. Of course, you can find them on all social media platforms, as well as 10thwhiskey.com. And even more cool, you can use BWF15 for a 15% discount. So get yourself some stuff for Christmas. I've been saying it for last week. So we're getting closer to Christmas. It's December 2nd. Go buy stuff for your family at 10thwhiskey.com. You can get them in 41 different states through online distribution, as well as 28 states through regular retail distribution. So if you have any questions, go check them out, 10thwhiskey.com. And I want to thank 10th Mountain Whiskey for being the sponsor on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Tom. So thank you for everything. Thank you for your
Yeah.
time, first and foremost,
Absolutely.
and providing us the history of your family's distillery. Well, your
Sure.
wife's family's distillery,
Yeah.
and now yours, because you're married into it. So,
Yeah.
and giving us the background of your history into whiskey, because it's amazing to see what people do from one area and then move all the way around to where you're currently at. It's quite amazing. So thank you
Yeah.
for everything you're doing.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
Hopefully we get to visit you again and come. And
Thanks
come
for having me. Yeah, anytime.
Absolutely.
We love to have guests. So
Yeah. Absolutely.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Remember, a bourbon with friends can change the world, guys. Have a great day or night. Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
That's it for this episode of Bourbon with Friends. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. While you're at it, leave us a review to make it easier for others to find the show. You can also check us out on Instagram at Bwfpodcast. Thanks for listening.